The Princess and the Frog. There was once a young princess who lived in a beautiful palace surrounded by trees. She was a quiet child and spent many hours alone in the wood round the palace. On her birthday one year, her father the king gave her a golden ball. This became her most treasured possession. As she wandered through the woods, she tossed it gently in the air to see the reflections on the trees in its polished surface. She never tired of her golden ball and took it everywhere. Then one day she threw the golden ball too high. She reached out to catch it, but it slipped from her grasp and fell into a deep pool. The princess was very upset. The pool was deep and she could not swim. How could she ever get it back? She sat down at the edge of the pool and began to cry, but just as the first tears began to roll down her cheeks, she heard a tiny voice coming from the pool. "Why are you crying?" The princess looked up and saw a little frog perched on the rock in the middle of the pool. She was rather surprised to hear a frog talking, but was too upset to think about it much. "I have lost my golden ball in the pool," she replied. "It was my most precious possession. My father gave it to me." The frog stared at her in silence for a moment. "I could help you to get your ball back," he said, "but you must promise me something in return." "I would do anything," the princess said. "Would you take me to the palace as your guest?" asked the frog. The princess nodded in agreement. "And would you let me eat from your plate and sleep in your bed?" The princess nodded again, without thinking. "Will you kiss me good night?" asked the frog. The princess was growing impatient. "Yes, yes," she cried, "anything you like." So the frog dived into the pool and got the golden ball. The princess laughed with delight. "Thank you for getting my ball back." And before the frog had time to speak, the princess had run off toward the palace, forgetting her promise. The frog hopped along behind, but the princess had soon disappeared from sight among the trees. When she reached the palace, the frog was still in the woods. "Wait," he called. "Remember your promise." But she was too far away to hear him. The princess was sitting down to supper with her family when the frog hopped up the palace steps. As the princess took her first mouthful, she heard a knock at the door. "Princess, remember your promise," a tiny voice called. The princess blushed, remembering the little frog. Her father demanded an explanation, so the princess told him how the frog had retrieved her golden ball from her. "I promised to invite him to the palace, father," she said. "Please, may he come in?" The king was a man of honor. If the princess had made a promise, she could keep it. "Of course, my child," he smiled at her. "Let him in. He is welcome to eat with us." So the princess opened the door and showed the frog into the dining hall. The princess pulled out a chair from the frog and asked for a plate for him, but the frog put up a tiny webbed foot to stop her. "I don't need a chair, thank you, for I cannot reach the table from there," he said. "I shall just sit on the table." He hopped up beside the princess' plate. "And remember," he added, "you promised that I could eat from your plate." "Is this true, my dear?" asked the king. The princess nodded. "Very well," said the king. "Let the frog sit there beside you and eat from your plate. You must honor your promise to him." The princess could not eat much that night. She did not want to hurt the frog's feeling, and she knew she had made a promise to him, but she did not enjoy sharing her plate with such a slimy little creature. She managed to swallow only a few mouthfuls. The frog, on the other hand, ate heartily of everything that was offered to him. The king was astonished to see the frog tuck it to the food, which was not what he had expected a frog to enjoy. When the meal was over, the frog turned to the princess once more. "I'm tired," he said. "Shall we go to bed?" The king called for a bed to be prepared, but the princess shook her head at her father. "As part of my promise to the frog, I agreed that he could sleep in my bed." "You did?" said the king, astonished. "Yes, I did, father," the princess replied, "and I must keep my promise to him." The king bade the frog good night and let the princess take him off to her bedchambers. The princess was feeling very gloomy. She had been too hasty in agreeing to the frog's wishes. How could she sleep with the frog in her bed? But a more unpleasant surprise was in store for the princess. She had just got into bed when the frog nudged her and spoke one more time. "Don't you remember, princess? You promised that you would kiss me good night," he said. The princess had forgotten all about this. "Did I really promise you that?" he asked quietly, praying that it was not true. "Oh, yes, princess. That was indeed what you promised me," insisted the frog. The princess could think of nothing more revolting than kissing the frog. He was a kind little fellow, but he was cold, slimy, and ugly. What could he do to harm her if she refused to kiss him? But in her heart the princess knew what was right. Promises have to be kept. Her father would agree. "You were good enough to help me when I lost my golden ball," she said to the frog. "If I promise to kiss you good night, then I will do just that." So saying, the princess took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and placed a gentle kiss on the frog's slimy green head. When she opened her eyes again, the frog was nowhere to be seen. The princess searched all over the head, but it was vanished. Then she heard a deep voice coming from behind him. "Here I am, princess," it said. The princess turned round and saw a handsome young man standing by her bedside. "Who are you? Why are you here?" she asked. The man smiled gently down at her. "Don't be afraid," he said to her. "I am the frog that you kissed. I am really a prince, but I was put under a spell by an evil witch many years ago. She turned me into a frog, and the spell could only be broken if I could find a lady brave and kind enough to kiss me. Your kiss has broken the spell, and at last I am free again." The princess was delighted. She ran to tell her father the good news. The king was very proud. "You see now, my child, what a promise can do," he told the princess. Over the next few days, the royal household celebrated the prince's return to the human world, but sadly the time came when he had to return to his own kingdom. The sadness the princess felt, however, was short-lived, for on the eve of his departure, the prince asked her to marry him. He had fallen in love with her for her kindness and her honest heart. The princess was overjoyed and agreed at once to be his wife, and when the happy couple set off to start their life together, they took the golden ball with them.